Welcome to the history of crocodiles, this time where we talk about the modern groups and their direct relatives. We've got a couple collabs and a plethora of information coming up in this video, and I'm sorry it took me so long to get it out, but I'm sure you can see why it did with how long it is. Regardless, I hope you all enjoy this glimpse into these ancient animals' past. Crocodilia, the family that encompasses all modern crocs, also encompasses all extinct true crocodiles as well. This main family can be split into three categories: the Alligatoroidea, the Longirostres, and the Planocranidae. The Planocranidae are a group that is uncertainly placed, just like so many others. Formerly, this group was known as the Pristachampsidae. However, when Pristachampus was found to be a nomen dubium in 2013, this group was revived to take its place. Some scientists consider them to be just outside the crown group rather than true crocs themselves, alongside animals like Borealisuchus. However, most studies have found that they belong to the true crocodiles as a sister group to the Longirostres. These animals are sometimes called hoofed crocodiles due to the blunt claws that do somewhat resemble hooves. This suggested that they would have run in a similar manner to hoofed mammals on the tips of their toes, which could give them a faster running speed. These animals are also notable because once again crocs were venturing out of the water and onto land, but this time in the true crown group. They were considered to be terrestrial, having long limbs held under the body and giving them an upright stance. Once again, instead of having flattened heads, their heads were more compressed and allowed them a better field of view, not relying on a watery ambush. These animals first appeared directly after the Cretaceous extinction, attempting to claim dominance in the early days of the Paleocene, and they at least partially held on to it, lasting until around the mid-Eocene around 40 million years ago. Part of their success can be attributed to, of course, their armor. Compared to the rest of their family, their armor was far more extensive, with osteoderms on their legs and completely encasing their tail. With the dinosaurs gone, these 10-foot-long armored predators would have been one of the top dogs, at least for a while. The Alligatoroidea is considered to be the most primitive lineage of true crocodiles. They are thought to have split from the other lineages around 80 to 100 million years ago, with three primitive species known before other lineages began to form within those primitive alligatoroids. Two of the earliest known are Lidiosuchus and Dinosuchus, arguably the most famous of the extinct crocodiles. You already know Dinosuchus is an absolutely massive animal and one of, if not the top contender for the largest pseudosuchians of all time. Current official estimates place them at around 36 feet, just shy of 11 meters in length, though there are some who claim it could reach upwards of 40 feet or 12 meters long. However, this is still up in the air and needs to be studied in depth. They would have appeared very similar to modern alligators, but with some differences aside from their massive size. Their snout is unique among all crocodilians, being more robust and wider at the front. Their osteoderms were uniquely large and contained many pits and grooves for muscle attachments, allowing them better maneuverability both on land and in the water. Dinosuchus first appeared about 80 million years ago, and during its time it dominated North American freshwater. Using the tried and true method we all know and love today, these massive predators would have ambushed and hunted large dinosaurs. With a bite force estimated between 10 and 23,000 pounds per square inch, it may have had a stronger bite than the infamous Tyrannosaurus rex, and once its jaws locked around prey, it was pretty much over. That being said, the reason I said may is some of the upper estimates for their bite force may be exaggerated, as they were based on skull size alone, comparing it to modern-day saltwater crocodiles. There would be other factors that would need to be considered as well, like muscle density, teeth, and attachment areas. Unlike Sarcosuchus and earlier crocodiliforms, these massive predators were in fact able to use the infamous death roll, tearing their prey apart bit by bit. Their rear teeth were also well suited to crushing prey, showing us that like modern alligators, they had a diverse selection of prey that they could choose from. These early alligatoroids dominated during their time, giving way to the rest of their family's success. As we go even further down this line, we reach a group called the Globidonta, the line that would lead to both alligators and caimans. Some more recent studies have placed both Dinosuchus and Lidiosuchus as the most basal members of this group, but most studies still seem to consider them to be outside of it. The most primitive confirmed Globidonts are Brachychampsa and Stangerochampsa. Both taxons appear at the end of the Cretaceous, around 66 million years ago. They were relatively small animals, characterized by rather long legs and teeth designed for crushing prey. This would allow them to niche partitions with the other crocs around them, as Brachychampsa would have shared territory with the likes of Thoracosaurus and Borealisuchus. Instead of focusing on fish or even dinosaurs, these small gators focused on shellfish and possibly small turtles. Shellfish were incredibly common in the waterways of the time, including mussels and clams, and would have been their main food source more than likely. It has been suggested that many of these primitive alligatoroids with their long legs would have been at least partially able to come onto the land for hunting or similar. However, some folks don't consider consider these animals Globidonts. Some studies have placed Brachychampsa and its relative as stem caimans instead in some of the earliest examples of true caimans. This is based on their similarity in their skull and jaw structure and would show that true alligators would have already evolved during the late Cretaceous. That being said, this is still up in the air, like most things with crocs, so it could go either way. Before we move on, two other animals arose again as basal Globidonts. However, this has also been debated heavily. The two animals in question are Ceratosuchus and Navajosuchus. Some studies have placed them as Globidonts, and others have placed them as some of the most basal Alligatoroinae, true alligators. At around 2 meters, they aren't very large animals and would have served a moderate role in the early days following the Cretaceous extinction. First appearing around 60 million years ago, these mid-sized predators were sticking to the water, something that we recognize as the norm for crocs today. Ceratosuchus itself is notable as the only horned crocodilian. These small horns would have given an almost dragon-esque appearance to the animal. Unlike many horns in the animal kingdom, these ones would not have been useful in combat. Rather, they were likely for two main reasons. The first, of course, is mating purposes. It's thought that these large horns may represent a healthier individual and may boost their chances in mating. The second is species recognition. Ceratosuchus shared its territory with other members of its family, including the primitive alligator Alligatoroid. These horns would make it easier for them to identify one another, likely for mating or territorial purposes. Whether they are true alligators or not is still up to debate overall. In contrast to the Globidonts, another not well understood group known as the Orientalosuchinae were rising in Asia. These primitive alligatoroids were thought to be the Asian equivalent to animals like Brachychampsa, with blunt teeth designed for crushing, a short and wide skull, and an overall smaller body plan. These include animals like Eoalligator and the more recently discovered Eurycephalus. These Asian taxons are thought to be more land-based than their North American counterparts, and they take the skull plan of animals like Brachychampsa to the extreme. Specifically, if we look at Eurycephalus, we find that their head is extremely specialized, and if we look further, we see that it shared territory with a yet unidentified crocodilian. Their specialized skull likely allowed them into a niche that separated them from this other, seemingly larger crocodilian, which is not uncommon at all, and it really just goes to show the lengths nature will go to make sure that two animals don't directly compete with each other unless absolutely necessary. Most people forget that to animals, life is a great game of survival, and sometimes the smarter play is to not get into direct competition. It's really just fascinating, to be honest. This brings us to the true alligators, including the species we know today. The crown group Alligatoridae represents two major groups, the Alligatorinae and the Caimani, the alligators and the caimans. Despite being a relatively well-understood family of animals, the exact placement for numerous animals is still highly debated and leaves some of them in uncertain placements. Starting with the alligators, the oldest confirmed members appeared just after the Cretaceous extinction, with animals like Alligatorosuchus appearing around 60 million years ago, splitting off from the caimans around the same time. They spread all across North America in those early days, and it's thought that many of the Asian alligator species crossed over during this time after the dinosaurs, similar to how Asian and American tyrannosaurs did during the Cretaceous. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier with the Orientalosuchinae, there is a significant lack of fossil material in Asia for its ancient alligators and their relatives, leaving their origins somewhat cloudier than they normally would be. In North America, alligators diversified the most as far as we're aware, but that might not be true considering we don't have a lot of information from Asia. North American alligators diverged so much, in fact, that at one point alligators began to cross over to Europe during the Eocene, giving rise to several extinct alligatorines from the region like Aramborgia. Now here's where things become a little more confusing. Several species of alligators would arise during the following period of time, including the two modern species that we know today. The extinct species that I'll list up above here are all still true alligators, but they had a few differences from the gators that we all know and love to separate them. Alligator prenasalis is considered to be the most primitive based on its much more simple skull. They are also the oldest confirmed true alligators, being around 40 million years old. Some, like Alligator mcgrewi, is known to have been fragmentary and is thought to have been significantly smaller than modern American alligators, likely around the same size as Chinese alligators. A species from Florida, Alligator olseni, is thought to have preceded American alligators and may be directly ancestral to them, but we're not entirely sure. None of these early gators were as large as the modern American alligator, but one unique animal rose in Asia to show that size wasn't really everything. To talk about this unique and interesting animal as well as the American alligator, I've brought on someone who lives nearby and has worked closely with these alligators. A fantastic wildlife educator, this is Dean with DNA Reptiles. He regularly works closely with reptiles and other animals and is an avid educator. I highly recommend checking out his content, and I'll make sure to leave a link to it down below. But go ahead, Dean, introduce us to this creature.
Hey guys, this is the Chinese alligator, A. sinensis. And originally, due to the bony plate above their eyelid, these animals were thought to be closely related to caimans when they were first described in the 1800s. There's still discourse today on whether or not these guys belong to the genus of alligators. These guys first appeared in the Pliocene about 3 million years ago, making them a pretty young species, even younger than the American alligator. Despite being so young, these guys are thought to have thrived throughout a big portion of Asia before human settlement really began to spread in the region. These guys are actually relatively small compared to other crocodilians. They max out at about 8 feet. It's about 2.5 meters for all you non-freedom unit using people. And unlike American alligators, they do not have webbed feet, despite spending the majority of their time in the water. It has a short and broad snout and is considered to be the most docile of all the crocodilians. It is thought that they would never attack a person unless provoked or desperate. And uniquely, unlike the American alligator, their osteoderms go around their entire body, including their belly. Very similar to the ancient pseudosuchians. And like many other croc species, these guys are extremely adept at digging, and will actually do so in the winter by constructing burrows. During the winter, Chinese alligators will go through a process called brumation, which is like a reptile version of hibernation. Instead of completely shutting down their body, they slow down their metabolism, and they will go for months without eating. Many snake owners who live in colder climates, I will have to say, here in Florida, we're going through a cold spell right now, and it's like, I want to say it's like 30 degrees this morning. Absolutely freezing. The snakes here even go into brumation, even though it's Florida. People don't think of it like that. But anyway, it's just the reptile version of hibernation, and they will come out to do a few things like drink, and then they go right back and go into their deep sleep and just kind of shut everything down and just chill out until it gets warm again. This species also thermoregulates pretty well, it seems, because they only bask for a short period of time and are mostly active at night. And the majority of their diet is shellfish, especially snails and fish. But unfortunately, like many members of its family, these ancient animals are in danger of human prejudice. Due to extensive poaching for their skins and loss of their native range, Chinese alligators are one of the most endangered species on the planet, with only about 120 actually living in the wild. It's not all doom and gloom though. An extensive breeding program was put forward in 2016. It already has 15,000 Chinese alligators. These are being slowly released back into the wild, and there has been some success. These minuscule crocs are amazing and very placid creatures, and I cannot wait to see them make a rebound. American alligators, the one that you probably know the most, are a whole other ballgame. These predators from the southern United States have been here far longer than we have. First arising about 8 million years ago. By 3 million years ago, these guys were all over the southern United States. And part of their large success here in the northern hemisphere is their tolerance for the cold. Unlike most crocodilians who don't handle the cold well at all, American alligators can stand temperatures of 45 degrees or lower without really showing any signs of slowing down. Even when the water that they're living in freezes over, they can stick their snout out of the water and survive completely frozen as long as they got that air coming through. And like the Chinese alligator, this is a form of brumation. And just like the Chinese alligator, they are able to dig large burrows. And this is a rather important thing for the American alligator. It helps make them a keystone species. And the reason is that they will create gator holes in their wetland environments. Now, these holes will retain water during the drier seasons. And the water helps not only the alligators, but a multitude of other species. That these water holes will help them survive throughout the drier times. And especially in the Everglades, it does get dry during the summer. Shoot, this past year, half of the Everglades was the driest it had ever been, while the other half was the wettest. It was weird, but the alligators helped keep a lot of those animals that were in those drier times and help them survive. Now, one of the main restrictions that alligators have that most people don't really know is that they do not have salt glands. They cannot remove the salt from the water they take in. And because of this, they don't really adventure outside of fresh water. They practically only stay in fresh water. Every once in a while during a storm, they'll get flushed out of a river or a stream, and I've seen them in brackish and salt water, but it's not normal, and they don't do that well for very long, and they do their best to get back into that fresh water. Otherwise, there's a good chance that the salt will actually blind them, and unfortunately, if they're in there too long, they'll probably die. But this keeps them separate from the American crocodile, which can do very well in salt water. American alligators are one of the largest species of crocodilia alive today, with adult males getting around 11 to 15 feet long, or 3.3 to 4.6 meters. So it's kind of rare to see them at that size. The average big male that I tend to see is about 10 to 11 feet. There, of course, are a lot of sightings of larger alligators than this, but it's very hard to document these, and unless they're measured, they pretty much are never bigger than 15 feet. The only one that could be considered somewhat reliable was a report of an alligator shot in the Everglades that was 17 feet 5 inches. That's about 5.3 meters. Only exceptional specimens can reach that size. And interesting, American alligators are one of the animals that are fighting back against a lot of the invasive species such as Burmese pythons, hogs, and my favorite, domestic house cats. I don't know if you could tell if that was sarcasm or not. And due to their role as the apex predator, outside of humans, they are the ones that are impacted by the invasive species the most. And it should be noted that some invasives, like the Burmese pythons, once they get to a certain size, can easily eat baby alligators. And alligators, in turn, will eat the Burmese pythons, but it's a constant battle back and forth, and they can only do so much. And we need help however we can to get rid of those invasive species down there. Not just the scaly ones, but the furry ones too. Keep your cats inside, please. But speaking of which, the American alligator was almost driven to extinction. American alligators were hunted at an incredibly unsustainable rate in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And by the 1960s, they were on the verge of extinction and were missing from the majority of their original range. In 1967, the US government banned the hunting of American alligators completely. And over the next 20 years, U.S. Fish and Wildlife worked extensively to conserve the American alligator and also reintroducing them back into the wild. And thanks to this amazing service, in 1987, the American alligator was taken off of the endangered species list and is considered fully recovered. American alligator hunting is actually legal. Not only is it legal, but it is very sustainable. I've done it myself. Alligator tastes amazing. I love them. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. But, as I said before, it is a completely sustainable practice compared to the complete mess it was before. The American alligator is actually considered one of the best success stories ever in conservation. And like the American alligator, a lot of animals have been taken off of the endangered species list because of efforts that were made that were just like the American alligator. And here in Florida in particular, there are well over 1 million alligators. 1 million just in this state. The last thing I want to talk about with alligators is something they have in common with the mugger crocodiles. Both species are known to use rudimentary tools in assistance with their hunts. During any bird nesting seasons, they will hold a stick in their mouth or even just have it right on top of their nose. And they'll wait just below the surface and wait for a bird to come by to grab it to use in their nest. This is a very interesting behavior, and it does hint at some higher intelligence of some sort to be able to put two and two together, that stick and bird equals food.
Thank you so very much for that, Dean, and like I said, make sure you check out his page with the links down below. And just to add about the alligator's success, I think it really goes to show that we can do more and aid these animals that we keep driving close to extinction if we really focus our minds to it. And hopefully more crocodilians who are on the verge of extinction can make a drastic recovery, just like the alligator. Alligators are one of the most famous and notable groups of crocodilians today, but I personally think that they heavily overshadow their cousins, who are just as impressive in my opinion. The direct cousins of the alligators would be the Caiman, usually considered the smallest of the crocs and one of the more diverse groups that are still around today. Unlike many groups of crocs, their range is rather exclusive. Caimans can be found in Central and South America and as far north as Mexico. Most of these animals are relatively small as far as crocodiliforms go, with a few notable exceptions, including some extinct caimans. I mentioned earlier that some studies consider Brachychampsa as one of the earliest true caimans and one of the most basal members of this group. If that is true, these caimans would find their origins during the Cretaceous, just before the fall of the dinosaurs. If it's not true, then the earliest known caiman otherwise is Eocaiman, first appearing around 60 million years ago. These primitive caimans would have been among the great rush of animals vying for a spot on top before they eventually settled into a more mediary role. One of the other early caimans, Soabici, shows us that these animals had already begun to diversify heavily and spread into Central and North America by around 52 million years ago. Caiman origins, as we know them, show us that caimans first split off from the alligatoroids likely during or just after the Cretaceous. It would have had to have been at a time where there would have been passable islands or a form of land, as caimans have a low tolerance for salt water today compared to other members of their family, though we're not sure if that was a trait they lost over time. Another theory suggests that caimans went south before the Cretaceous even ended, and some animals survived on both sides of North and South America. This would make Soabici descended directly from a North American population of caimans rather than having their origins in South America. This brings us to the crown group of caimans and to where most of the modern animals are classified. However, there are 6 extinct taxons here as well. The first of these that I want to talk about is no doubt the Purosaurus. This was the largest known caiman with 3 known species. Early estimates, like with many giant extinct crocs, gave them all sorts of fantastical and whimsical numbers. Modern estimates still place them as incredibly large creatures though, between 33 to 35 feet, around 10 to 10.6 meters in length. They were incredibly heavily built, with a large and broad head as well as a bulky body. This has placed them in contest with Deinosuchus for the title of largest croc ever. A study published in 2015 shows us they had one of the most powerful confirmed bite forces of any animal, reaching upwards of 15,000 pounds per square inch, more than 7 metric tons of force. But the dinosaurs were gone, so what did this massive animal even eat? Purosaurus lived around 16 million years ago during the Miocene, and during this time its main source of food would have been mammals. These would especially include the now extinct notoungulates and the xenarthrans, who are still around today. These animals, like many others, used to be much larger. In this group of animals were things like the giant ground sloth and glyptodonts. In notoungulates there were great beasts like Toxodon, but there were also smaller members too. But it mattered little to Purosaurus, because these massive animals would have been the apex of their environment and likely had no natural predators themselves. But like so many other giants, they faced one real problem: themselves. Like so many other of the great giants that roamed our planet, or the amazing predators like Smilodon and Megalodon, Purosaurus was over-specialized. Its giant size made it almost untouchable in any sort of physical bout, and as such it required giant prey as well. Even that withstanding, its size gave it another disadvantage besides food: environment. Current consensus believes that this constantly changing environment in South America favored smaller caimans more, and as their large prey disappeared and their environment shifted around them, these giants were left behind, going extinct around 5 million years ago. But contrary to what most people seem to think, Purosaurus wasn't the only giant caiman. At the same time it lived, another animal, Mekosuchinae, also arose. Like the aforementioned Stomatosuchus, these odd caimans had a long and flattened skull, with many equating it to a duck almost. 4 species of this odd-looking caiman are known, and their size has been up for debate for a while. No matter what, when it comes to comparing them to modern caimans, Mekosuchinae was larger than most. Early estimates placed the largest species of Mekosuchinae at 31 feet, 9.5 meters, which would make it one of the largest crocodilians known. However, more recent studies took another look at their body and compared them exclusively to known caiman species. With that method, we instead got a maximum size of around 6 meters or 20 feet in length, longer than any modern caimans. However, it's important to note that all of these estimates are based on the fragmentary remains and comparative analysis. New fossil material would definitely help shed light on exactly how large these animals were. One of the most interesting things about Mekosuchinae was how they fed. 3 main theories have been suggested. One of these were that they were specialized to aquatic plant life instead of meat and were herbivores rather than carnivores. While certainly not impossible, it seems unlikely overall. Another theory was that it simply laid in wait, almost like snapping turtles, and perhaps waited for the prey to swim past their open jaws. But the theory that seems to have garnered the most support is that they were a sort of filter feeder or sift feeder. It is thought that they could have used these massive jaws like a shovel, scooping up sediment and filtering out the food from within. You may have seen something similar in the most recent season of Prehistoric Planet. This method would allow them to eat a plethora of smaller animals and may have been a way for them to niche partitions with animals like Purosaurus. Like their bigger cousin assume they too disappeared around the same time, suggesting that they also could not cope with the changes in their environment. Now, this brings us to the modern groups of caiman, but you might be surprised to learn that the most basal of these animals are actually still around today. The most primitive caimans are the smooth-fronted caiman and Cuvier's dwarf caiman. These two are both classified under the genus Paleosuchus, which is thought to have diverged from other caimans some 30 million years ago. This means they may be even older than the extinct species like Purosaurus. They are very closely related to one another and represent the last of a very old line. Also, whoever decided to call these the smooth-fronted caiman and Cuvier's dwarf caiman and not Paleosuchus, I don't know what you were thinking, bro, but that ain't it. I understand common names are a thing for a reason, but come on, Paleosuchus is such a cool name. Also, I'll be honest, looking at both of these crocs in photos, I think they would be some of the most terrifying crocs ever, if they weren't so small. These two are the smallest living members of the alligatoroids as a whole, smaller on average than even the Chinese alligator. Smooth-fronted caimans are known to reach a maximum average of around 5 feet, around 1.5 meters. However, notably, large males have reached up to around 7.5 feet, nearly 2.5 meters. As for Cuvier's caiman, they are the smallest living species, and you may have seen them kept as pets by several different folks across social media. They reach around the same maximum as the smooth-fronted caiman, but are smaller on average, and the largest ever was recorded at only 5.7 feet, around 1.7 meters long. Both of these species share traits with one another not found in other groups, including a more powerful and durable set of osteoderms. It is thought that these large and heavy osteoderms are to help reduce predation on these animals, as their smaller size makes them far more vulnerable, and that just gives them a slight advantage in that field. The smooth-fronted caiman is known mainly to hunt on land, and doesn't hunt many fish or aquatic prey as far as we're aware. Though it does spend a large portion of its time in and around the water, it is known to mainly hunt animals like snakes, birds, and lizards on the land, and they are one of the only known predators of the South American porcupine. Unlike many of their relatives, these animals do not seem particularly fond of the sun. Even in captivity, they are rarely seen basking and spend much of their day hiding or submerged. While they never stray too far from the water overall, these animals are known to spend significant portions of time away from the water, hunting in the dense jungles where it can lie in wait. While many crocs are under threat all over the world like the American alligator, smooth-fronted caimans are actually not one of them. There are thought to be over 1 million of these animals in the wild today, and they are still heavily regulated under international law. Another major reason that they are thought not to be endangered is because they can't be hunted because of their powerful armor. Their armor is incredibly heavy and bony, and these animals don't make good leather on account of their small size and large armor, a neat adaptation to protect them from human greed. That protection stretches to Cuvier's caiman as well, as their large and powerful armor makes it difficult to obtain a good amount of leather, again protecting them from human greed. Aside from environmental impacts, these guys are doing fairly well in the wild, to the point that they have been extensively collected for the pet trade and still doing okay. People, of course, always have doubts about the pet trade, but it is possible to keep these animals responsibly and well, as shown by many different folks online, but it is not a pet I recommend for most unless you have a lot of room and a lot of money to spare. In contrast to the smooth-fronted caiman, Cuviers are more focused on aquatic prey such as fish and mollusks, but like most crocs, they are opportunistic and will take the most types of prey if they can get their jaws on it. They are also mostly nocturnal and hunt during the night, and during the dry season they do something similar to the Chinese alligator. Instead of brumation, where the animal goes into a state of dormancy due to colder temperatures, these animals go through something known as aestivation. This usually takes place during the summer rather than the winter, and only during extremely dry seasons. Like Chinese alligators, Cuvier's caiman will create a burrow for themselves in the summer, slowing down their metabolism and requirement for food before the wet season returns and they go back to normal. Like the American alligators, these guys are also considered a keystone species, but not for the same reason. A plethora of fish are spread across this caiman's territory, and many of them are kept in check by this predator. Because of how much it focuses on aquatic prey, it is thought that without these guys, many other species might become too widespread and cause havoc among the Amazon ecosystem. They are sort of nature's balance for many different species. Moving on from the primitive boys, we go to some of the more recent additions. We are going to try to leave everything in their natural groupings as we talk about them, and the spectacled caiman and the yakare caiman are two closely related animals, so much so that they are often confused for the same animal as each other, and some scientists place them within the same genus. They are almost almost indistinguishable in terms of morphology, but they are slightly better adapted for their respective environments. Spectacled caimans are more common in the northern parts of South America, and Yacare caimans are more common in the south. These are some of the most common animals people think of when they think of caimans, as they are moderately sized and lightly built compared to some of their counterparts. The main predator of these animals are jaguars and anacondas, though only jaguars will really hunt the large animals. The Yacare caiman is the oldest of the two, estimated to have first appeared around 11 million years ago. Male Yacares tend to reach around 6.5 to 10 feet, around 2 to 3 meters, and I haven't been able to find any official records larger than that. Like many caimans, they have the iconic patterning, almost like ink splotches. While fish and snails make up most of their diet, especially among young individuals, larger animals have been known to kill mammals such as capybara. Like many crocodile species, these guys for a long time were under tremendous threat and pressure. Millions were killed in an incredibly short span of time, mostly in the 80s, and in 1992 a ban was placed to protect them. However, today they have bounced back significantly, much like the alligator. It is once again legal to hunt them, but is extremely regulated to prevent another such disaster. One big reason it has bounced back is the fact that unlike many other croc species, they can reproduce fairly quickly. Spectacled caimans are incredibly similar to the Yacares, but are notably smaller on average. Spectacles average between 6.5 to 8 feet, around 2 to 2.5 meters, and fewer of them get to that large size. It also shares a spotted and blotchy pattern across its body, though in colder months this is harder to see. These animals get darker in color when the temperatures go down, likely to increase the amount of sunlight they can absorb. The name spectacled caiman comes from a bony ridge between its eyes, which almost gives it the appearance of wearing glasses. These animals can be found all across the northern parts of South America and has the largest range of any caiman. It is also one of the only invasive caimans, with invasive populations established in Florida and Cuba. While it's unlikely that they'd be able to survive much farther north, they've become a threat in the places they are established and have outcompeted animals like the Cuban crocodile and pose a serious threat to those native species. Part of their success is the fact that they can be generalist predators and will not stick to aquatic prey as much as the Yacare caiman, broadening their spectrum and allowing them to adapt, though they seem to prefer aquatic prey more overall. They faced hunting pressure too, but stories of other caiman species saved most of these animals. Despite millions of these animals being hunted since the 1980s, populations remain fairly stable as protections for animals like the Yacare caiman extended to them as well. However, some notable subspecies of this animal have been hunted to near extinction, such as the Rio apiporus caiman and the groups in Colombia. Overall, this genus is doing incredibly well, despite some of their species being rare or absent entirely. They are abundant across South America, and as long as they remain protected, I don't think that'll change anytime soon. Which brings us to our last two caimans, though they seem to have evolved separately from one another. The first of these, since we are going by most primitive, is the broad-snouted caiman, first appearing around 9 billion years ago. As their name implies, unlike many other caimans, they have a short and broad snout comparable to that of an alligator, but even more extreme. They are larger on average than their cousins, reaching around 2 to 3.5 meters, up to 11 feet long. Like many caimans, they have an overall generalist diet, but will mainly go after tougher prey like turtles. Their broad snouts are better adapted at crushing than their relatives, but that also allows them to adapt to another food source. In recent years, studies have been published suggesting broad-snouted caimans are omnivores rather than strictly carnivorous. They were seen eating fruit in captivity, and this led us to discovering they also do it in the wild. It has been suggested that they are an important method of seed dispersal across their home range, and fruit may make up a large portion of their diet. Hunting of broad-snouted caimans began much earlier than others because while they do have osteoderms, their skin is far smoother and less rough than their relatives. This made them extremely threatened from the 1940s onwards until regulations were placed to prevent them from being overhunted. While their populations have somewhat recovered, they are still endangered as a whole, but hopefully, like the other caimans, they can recover quickly. And last, but certainly not least, we reach the largest caiman genus still alive today, the black caiman. There are two known species, but one of them is extinct. This animal is generally considered the largest alligatorid alive, even larger than the American alligator. Male black caimans have a slightly larger range on their sizes, reaching about 11.5 to 16.5 feet, around 3.5 to 5 meters. There have, of course, been claims of even larger caimans exceeding 6 meters or 20 feet in length. However, like alligators, there have been no confirmed specimens of this size. Despite that, it seems many scientists generally agree that these caimans can reach up to that size. Whether or not it's true still kind of remains to be seen. They have an overall generalist diet, and smaller individuals are particularly fond of fish. Larger caimans, of course, tend to hunt larger prey and will more commonly take large mammals, even African river dolphins on occasion. Large adults regularly prey upon capybara. Their names are actually accurate as well, as unlike many caimans, they have a much darker coloration. They also have proportionally larger head and eyes and are overall bulkier than the other caimans. This bulk gives them a significant advantage when hunting, much like other crocs, as it allows them to take on far larger prey and also offers them a bit of protection. Adult males are rarely killed by the predators of smaller caimans like jaguars and anacondas. Smaller individuals, of course, can and are still taken by predators, but like other large crocs, adult males have almost no natural predators. Even the infamous and mighty jaguar will rarely attack a large black caiman, and large caimans are also capable of hunting these jaguars as well, though the cats notably stay away from ponds that they've seen especially large caimans at. Jaguars, based on what we can tell, are capable of carrying animals up to 700 pounds, around 320 kilograms of weight. Especially large males would almost certainly be too much for a jaguar, as they exceed up to 1,100 pounds, around 500 kilograms. This makes the black caiman one of the dominant predators of its range, but unfortunately they aren't doing as well as some of the others. Between the 1950s and 70s, they were hunted to the point that they became endangered, and once again protections had to be put in place on this species in the hopes of restoring them. While hunting limitations has helped them a bit, habitat loss has hindered their recovery. Despite their powerful build and size, they are slower to reproduce than other caiman species and have had a difficult time recovering due to their niche being filled by the overabundance of spectacled caiman. Spectacled caimans compete directly with juvenile black caimans for aquatic prey, and this competition has kept black caiman numbers far lower than normal. While not classified as endangered any longer, they are considered conservation dependent and still require human help wherever they can. Part of the issue with helping these animals is the public's perception of them. Many people are driven by fear of these animals because they are so large and powerful that they can in fact hunt humans, much like alligators and crocodiles. While I can understand this fear, hopefully folks can overcome their fear once they learn about the animals. They are magnificent creatures, all of them, and they deserve our respect and kindness, even if they can be fearsome predators. And so ends the alligatoroids, and brings us to the last major group of animals, the Longirostres. This includes the animals we all know and love, crocodiles, and the brilliant group of animals known as gavials. But, as I'm sure you've guessed, there is far more to it than that. These animals can be split into two major groups, the Crocodiloidea and the Gavialoidea. We'll start with the less popular but still very impressive Gavialoidea. These animals first appeared around 70 million years ago and diverged along a path much different from the rest of their kin, with long and pointed snouts. These animals are fairly large and their teeth are long and thin compared to the rest of their family. Though many of you may note from earlier in this video and previous videos that many different pseudosuchians evolved a thinner and longer snout, showing us that this has been a tried and true tactic for the family. The most primitive and earlier forms of these animals, such as Megadontosuchus, still maintained a lot of basal crocodilian features, and its skull and teeth were far more robust than most gavialids known. Their jaws were wider towards the rear, and not as specialized for fish as its later relatives would be. It was once thought that an even more ancient animal, Thoracosaurus, was a gavialid. However, more recent analysis has suggested that they are in fact not true crocs and are rather Eusuchians. Either way, this would eventually lead to the Gavialidae, which would further split into two groups again. One of these is the Tomistomenae, a group that is only represented today by one living species, the false gharial. Originally, these animals were thought to be closer related to crocodiles than true gharials, based entirely on fossil and bone evidence. It wasn't until molecular studies of these animals in 2018 that we learned that they were in fact gavialids and thus closer to true gharials. The extinct Tomistomenae have a complicated history, and there are many debates surrounding them, making many of them hard to classify. They are all relatively large animals, with the living species, the false gharial, reaching up to 5 meters or 16 feet for large males. They have an incredibly slender and long skull, with only true gharials having thinner snouts. Traditionally, we viewed these guys as being mainly fish eaters, piscivores, but more recent studies have shown us that they are actually generalist predators, despite their thin snouts. They're known to prey on monkeys, birds, and even deer across their native range, which are places like Borneo, Sumatra, Java, and Malaysia. Because of their remote location, there is still much to learn about the wild habits of these animals, including what season they reproduce. Unfortunately, they are listed as vulnerable, mainly due to habitat loss as the swamplands and surrounding forests are being destroyed. Alongside that, the species is often hunted in large numbers, hindering their chances of recovery. There is only thought to be around 10,000 of these animals left in the wild. Like many of the animals we will discuss, it is us humans who are the biggest threat to them. Moving on to the Gavialinae, which includes the true gharials, these are the crocs with the thinnest snouts of all their family. These animals first started appearing around 20 million years ago in the fossil record, though they may be older than that. Many primitive forms like Panghusuchus and Hanyusuchus had thin snouts to be sure, but not nearly so thin as their living relatives. These extinct forms were thought to be relatively large as well, with Hanyusuchus thought to reach around 6 meters or 20 feet in length. We'll talk more about them a little bit later. In the following time, around 15 million years ago, is when we see the snouts of these animals begin to taper more, becoming thinner and straighter with interlocking pointed teeth for grasping fish, and many gavialoids began to take to the seas rather than fresh water. This is exemplified in animals like Pisco gavialis, a large 25-foot or 7.5 meter long seafaring gavialid. They were thought to have been fast hunters, chasing down equally fast fish. This was thought to be a coastal species, coming onto the beaches when they weren't hunting or traveling. They also shared territory with another gavialid, Mekosuchinae, which was a much smaller generalist predator. They were thought to reach around 14 feet, 4.3 meters, so they're still large animals, relatively speaking. The group continued this trend of marine habits as it proved successful for them. It is thought that here is where the modern gharials attained their specialized snout. One in particular stood out, the enormous Griposuchus. Now, there are several species of Griposuchus, but one recently discovered species, G. croizati, was estimated to reach up to 33 feet or 10 meters in length. This would put them in the race for the largest of the gavialoids ever. That being said, Griposuchus was one of the most successful of these early gavialids, represented by multiple species in both marine and freshwater environments. This would also put them in contact with Purosaurus on occasion, which may have hunted them as well. This family of animals would lose their massive size over time, like the other crocodilians, due to the shifts in their environment. The formation of the Amazon basin rerouted much of the fresh water to the ocean rather than the warmer coastal waters of the Caribbean. This would force them to adapt and resulted in many of the giant species going extinct. However, over in Asia, there was another contender among the large gavialoids, which would be Ramphosuchus, a giant Asian gavialid. Originally, it was thought to be an absolutely monstrous size, with wild estimates placing them at 18 meters, nearly 60 feet long. However, those size estimates have long since been debunked, and nowadays it's thought that they would be around 33 feet or 10 meters in length, which is still a massive animal in retrospect. Between them and Griposuchus, currently Ramphosuchus is thought to be the heavier animal, weighing up to 3 tons at its heaviest estimates. In contrast, Griposuchus is thought to top out just shy of 2 tons themselves. However, these estimates should also be taken with a grain of salt, as Ramphosuchus is only known from fragmentary material on the snout and skull. Ramphosuchus is a relatively young species as well, first appearing around 5 million years ago and disappearing around 2 million years ago. They are thought to be a more generalized animal as well. This brings us to the true gharials, and for this I've brought on a friend to talk about them. Some of you may know him from TikTok from his popular shorts, but this is ForeverNPC. He makes a lot of cool content about prehistoric animals, museums, and donuts. He owns a donut shop. He doesn't just make content about donuts. Make sure to take a look-see at his content, which I'll link down below, but for now, go ahead and take us away, Tyson.
Well, I suppose it's my turn. Let's talk about gavials. So let's talk about the crocodilian family, Gavialidae. Currently, there are 2 living species. First, you have the gharials of South Asia. Scientific name, Gavialis gangeticus. The other species of this family are the false gharials of Southeast Asia. Scientific name, Tomistoma schlageli. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is the difference between these two? They look the same. For that, we have to look at their skulls. In general, members of this family have long, narrow snouts compared to their other crocodilian counterparts. But in the case of these two, the main distinction is the base of their skull, where in false gharials or Tomistoma, their base is a little bit more triangular and eventually narrows out. And in the case of the true gharials or Gavialis, their snouts kind of just shoot out from an abrupt change from the base of their skull. Differences aside, these two crocodilians have a lot in common. This family in general are specialized eaters. Due to their long, narrow snout, they're really good at catching fish. Because of the shape of their snout, they're able to whip their jaws with ease underwater quickly to catch their prey. These guys were built for the water. Of all the crocodilians today, these guys spend more time in the water than any other crocodile. They're the fastest and most agile of all crocs. They're also not the smallest either, with some of these reaching about 20 feet or 6 meters long. However, as great as they are in the water, they are lackluster on land. Due to their shorter, stouter legs, they can't lift themselves up on land, but instead slide around and push themselves. Oh, also, while we have this pic, you might notice that bump at the end of their nose. That is called a bulla, and it's only present in males. And it has empty chambers in it so that it could resonate and attract females, basically creating its own little love song. Now, this family, Gavialidae, is a recently new family within the crocodiles, believing to evolve from the Indian subcontinent, with evidence leading them back to the Pliocene about 2.6 million years ago. And one of the more notable extinct gavials is this guy, Hanyu Suchus, the Chinese gharial, who is named after this guy, Han Yu, a Tang Dynasty poet/official, who one day proclaimed that these crocodiles must leave the area or be killed. Well, with Hanyu Suchus not respecting the authority of Han Yu, these gharials were, they were hunted to extinction. So there you go, a quick summary of gavials. Hopefully you learned something new and appreciate these most specialized of crocodilians.
I couldn't have said that last part better myself, Tyson, and make sure you guys go check out his content at his channel. Again, I'll make sure to leave that link down below. But his last note about Hanyu Suchus brings me to an important note about gharials. At the start of the 20th century, there was thought to be thousands of gharials, and they were considered common animals among their native range. However, by the 80s, their population had been severely reduced, and they were no longer found through over 90% of their ancestral range. There was only thought to be around 200 left alive in the wild at the time. It was around this time, as other parts of the world had successful conservation programs, that conservation also began for the gharial. However, unlike many of the programs that were thought to be successful, the gharials has been far less. This is mainly in part to just how many different threats they face. Gill nets, which have become far more common for fishing in the area, have killed numerous gharials since their rise in popularity. Aside from this, various mining projects as well as dams, irrigation canals, and similar things have destroyed the gharials' territory and continues to do so today. The loss of habitat and ensnarement has hindered their recovery and forced them into smaller and smaller areas. They are listed as critically endangered, and there is only suspected to be around 900 or less of these animals still in the wild, with Nepal being one of the leaders of current conservation. Various conservation efforts worldwide have begun to crack down harder on their recovery, but it's still been incredibly slow. Recently, they were sighted in Pakistan for the first time in over 30 years, and thankfully there has been efforts to increase conservation in Pakistan. In other words, they want the population there to not only survive, but thrive and to re-establish a solid wild population in the country. Hopefully, more efforts like this are taken and the species can make a proper recovery throughout their entire range. As Tyson was mentioning, Hanyu destroyed an entire species of gharial, so let's not follow in his footsteps and help keep these animals around for more. They, along with the false gharial, are the only remaining members of a unique and ancient lineage. Brilliant and beautiful animals, they are amazing creatures, and like so many others, they deserve our respect and love. Hopefully we can make sure that they pull through, and this finally leads us to the last of these animals and the most well-recognized groups of them all, the crocodiles. Crocodiloidea, the most infamous of this group overall, can be divided into two major groups, the Crocodilidae and the Mekosuchinae. The Mekosuchinae, which is the lesser known of the two, has a complicated history and their exact placement is unknown. While we do know they belong to a family that includes true crocodiles, they have been previously claimed separate under their own lineage from either the alligators, crocodiles, or gharials. They have also been embedded within the true crocodiles themselves, not far related from salties or similar. However, other studies, including one more recent one, shows that they very well might be crocodiloids and a sister group to the modern crocodile lineage rather than completely separate or completely embedded. The Mekosuchinae are known exclusively from Australia and its surrounding islands and are an extremely old lineage, thought to have first arisen around 56 million years ago. Some species survived until more recently and may have even had contact with humanity. They are incredibly diverse and appear to have taken on a multitude of different lifestyles, from walking on land land to the standard aquatic lifestyle, and even the possibility of arboreal species. The earliest of these animals is called Kambara, which like many early members of this group maintained a relatively similar build and likely lifestyle to modern crocodilians, being semi-aquatic ambush predators. There has been suggestions they may have been better adapted to walking on land, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were land crocs, as the rest of their build seems better suited to an aquatic life. It seems that these adaptations may have been for walking along the bottom of water bodies, which may have led to the terrestrial crocs we will talk about in a moment. There are 4 known species of Kambara, and 2 are thought to have possibly lived together, though I will say that they may not have actually interacted and were only forced together due to hard times. It is unclear exactly how the niche partitioning would have taken place, if it did at all. They were not the largest animals, being around 11 feet or 3.5 meters long, but still pretty big. Overall, they seem to have a relatively powerful bite force, designed for crushing prey and holding it in a powerful grip, and in one of the last species, it was thought that they developed a further adaptation to grasp large prey before crushing it with their jaws. Moving further along the line of these animals brings us to generalists like Australasuchus and Baru, with the former being notable as being a southern croc in Australia. Australasuchus seems completely separate from the other croc genuses present at the time, such as Baru, and it was thought that this was because they were better adapted to the colder climates of southern Australia during this time period. How or why it was able to survive and last in that cold environment is still unknown, but it seems Australasuchus was far better suited to the cold than its neighbors. Baru, on the other hand, was a northern animal and the largest predator of its ecosystem. While it is generally thought that they would have been ambush predators, their hunting would have been a little different. At 13 feet, around 4 meters long, they were the apex of their ecosystem, but were also an incredibly robust croc. It was thought that they may have even grown larger, but no evidence has come forward to support this. Its skull is so robust that it earned them the nickname the cleaver-headed crocodile. Like many Mekosuchines, they had backwards curving teeth with sharp cutting edges, which differ from the conical teeth of modern crocs. These teeth, combined with powerful muscles in the head, would have allowed these animals an insanely powerful bite, designed not to hold, but to slice and rip through the animal's vital areas. This is where it gets the name cleaver. With one powerful blow, they tear through an animal. This would rapidly take down even large prey, making them well suited to hunt Australia's megafauna of the time. Another large and robust Mekosuchine, Paludyrix, appeared later on. Following Baru's trend, they were powerful animals and larger than their predecessor. Paludyrix is thought to have reached 16 feet on average, around 5 meters, with larger animals possibly reaching 6 meters or more. This is about the same as the modern saltwater croc. Much of the early crocodile fossil material from Australia was often assigned to the now dubious species Palomnarchus. Paludyrix was among the material that was assigned to them at the time, and it wasn't until 2020 that it was assigned to its own genus. However, unlike Baru, Paludyrix had conical teeth that was standard in crocodilians, with an overbite similar to that of an alligator. Paludyrix would have shared territory with other Mekosuchine crocodiles as well as the modern-day freshwater crocodile. While they may have had to compete with others of their kind, freshwater crocs occupy a different niche from the larger predators, allowing an easier coexistence. But undoubtedly, the most famous of the Mekosuchinae is Quincana. Alongside Paludyrix, Quincana was one of the last of the Mekosuchinae on the mainland of Australia. There are several different species of these animals and no clear indication of exactly what size it was. Current estimates have most of their fossils around 3 meters or 10 feet in length, but some undescribed specimens may have reached a whopping 6 meters. Its true size is difficult to verify due to the overall fragmentary nature of the remains, but we do have some decent material to learn from. Their teeth in particular stand out, as they have what are known as zyphodont teeth. They are recurved like Baru and sharply serrated. It was thought that these teeth were designed to take down large prey, like the giant mammals that occupied Australia at the time. While many would expect them to follow the trend of the other Mekosuchines, Quincana is speculated to have been a mainly terrestrial predator, though still capable of returning to water sources. This would have reduced competition between them and Paludyrix, but would have possibly brought them into competition with another predator, the Megalania. We aren't entirely sure if the two animals would have competed on a deep level like some modern animals do, but they did overlap in time and territory. They are both designed for two different methods of hunting, but may have targeted the same prey. We aren't entirely sure. The mainland Mekosuchinae lasted until around 10,000 years ago. It is speculated that as the global temperature shifted, cooling much of the planet, the territory that they lived in was changed drastically. It became much drier, and the freshwater, swampy habitats became less common. With these habitats gone, the modern crocodilians are thought to have survived by moving to coastal environments and may have outcompeted the Mekosuchians that remained. The only survivors were the ones who had moved to island habitats. One such animal was Mekosuchus, the namesake of the family and a curious little croc. Thought to be around 6.5 feet, they weren't particularly large animals, which wasn't needed for the island life. They originated on the mainland of Australia some 28 million years ago before spreading over the islands in the Coral Sea, including places like New Caledonia. As a result of their success, there were several different species which had short, blunt snouts not unlike caimans, but some species it seemed even shorter, likely for crushing the shells of mollusks. One species, M. whitehunterensis, seemed to have teeth designed for shaking their heads side to side, much like young crocs do today. These crocs seemed to be terrestrial and aquatic at the same time, with adaptations to living on land as well, with slightly longer limbs for a more upright stance. That being said, they likely still spent a decent amount of time in and around water. One species, M. inexpectus, has even been suggested to be arboreal in the past. This means it may have been capable of living to an extent in the trees. Most scientists seem to consider this unlikely, and as such, there hasn't been much research released on the matter. However, I think it is worth noting that many crocodilians today seem to exhibit behavior where they do happen to climb trees from time to time, at least to a certain extent, so I wouldn't rule it out entirely. Either way, these were the last of the living Mekosuchians, having gone extinct around 3,000 years ago. There has been suggestions that they were around as recently as 1,700 years ago, but this has not been confirmed as of yet, I believe. Mekosuchians are a brilliant group, fascinating in all the right ways, but now we come to the true crocodiles, the genus Crocodylus itself, as well as their direct relatives. This group is known as the Crocodilidae. The mainline crocodiles, as far as we know, arose around 46 million years ago. Around 40 million years ago, they split into two more groups, the Crocodylinae and the Osteolaeminae. It was thought that both groups originated in Africa before spreading out towards other continents. The Osteolaeminae can be defined by a fairly jarring split, with slender-nosed crocodiles on one end and more broad-nosed crocodiles on the other. This also includes several extinct animals, like Euthecodon, which has one of the most interesting skulls of any crocodilian, in my opinion. Euthecodon has a saw-like appearance when looked at from the top. The purpose for this was to separate the teeth, giving each its own bony sheath in the jaw. Euthecodon was also notable because it might be extremely large. Some estimates have placed this animal at up to 33 feet or 10 meters in length, with more reserved estimates maxing out around 28 feet or about 8.5 meters. It has to be noted that these measurements were based on Nile crocodiles, as there's not much material for this animal beyond the skull. This could potentially be a large error, as Nile crocodiles would likely have different proportions than the slender snouted genus. Their unique jaw structure allows these crocodiles to have a similar diet to gavials, so that might be a better comparison for size, but there's been no studies that have done so. In its time, Euthecodon would have also coexisted alongside one of its living relatives, the slender-snouted crocodile Mesostops, which contains two species. The slender-snouted crocodiles are different from their larger counterparts, however. Instead of focusing solely on fish, they have a more generalized diet, consisting of fish as well as smaller animals like birds. Males can reach up to around 4 meters, around 13 feet in length, though there have been estimates as high as 15 feet, around 4.5 meters. While certainly not the biggest nor most aggressive croc, these larger animals will take the opportunity to tackle bigger prey when the opportunity arises. Unfortunately, not much is known about these animals' behavior in the wild. As of 2014, they are critically endangered and cannot be found throughout much of their former range across West and Central Africa, and it's thought that fewer than 500 individuals remain in the wild today. However, conservation efforts have been underway, with Abidjan Zoo leading the charge with a breeding program that has already been introducing crocs to the wild once they reach around 4 years old. Because we lack any real knowledge about their wild habits, we have begun monitoring their populations more closely and hopefully helping these unique crocodiles survive. The last of the Osteolaeminae, the dwarf crocodile, has faced some contention. Usually referred to as a singular species, there have been past proposals for another isolated in the Congo Basin. This, however, has not been proven in any capacity as of this moment. So for now, let's focus on this one known species, which may be itself splitting off into another. Dwarf crocodiles are the smallest crocodiles, though they are larger than the dwarf caiman we previously discussed. These animals reach a maximum of around 6.2 feet, just shy of 2 meters in length. Because of how small they are, much like some caimans, they are incredibly heavily armored, giving them a much thicker, broader appearance. Of course, this is to reduce predation, as their smaller size leaves them far more vulnerable. These animals also inhabit West Africa, like the slender-snouted croc. However, unlike other crocs, these animals veer off from the norm. They are rarely ever noted to be basking in the sun like other crocs, and their darker coloration may help them soak up more sunlight without basking. They prefer heavily forested areas or areas with a lot of shade and are most active at night. This may also be an adaptation to avoid predators that may be active in the day. This might also be why the alleged cave crocodiles have begun to emerge. In recent years, the Abanda caves found in Gabon, Africa have been known to host a relatively small population of dwarf crocodiles. Studies have shown that these animals are an isolated genetic group, separating them slightly from their other relatives and setting them on their way to possibly becoming a new species. These animals live inside of these caves, which has slightly changed their coloration due to the water being filled with alkaline. These animals feed on the bats that inhabit the cave and may be getting their heat from an underground source. They live in near complete darkness and are incredibly remarkable. While the cave variety preys mainly on bats and larger insects because that's what's within the cave, the standard dwarf croc are opportunistic and will realistically eat anything alive small enough to fit in their mouths and then some. Like the other small animals, these guys are adept at making burrows for themselves to hide in. Their reclusive and solitary nature has made it somewhat difficult to determine their populations over the years. Like the heavily armored South American caimans, dwarf crocodiles are not widely hunted for leather because their skin makes for poor quality, which is a win for the crocs if you ask me. However, they are sometimes hunted for meat. However, their main threat is the loss of habitat. In certain areas like Gambia, the species is all but extinct. However, many places in Africa still hold a solid population for now. These guys are currently listed as vulnerable, and they certainly are if we keep destroying their habitat. Thankfully, this animal is widely kept in zoos across the world, so a complete extinction may not be likely for now, but a wild extinction would still be devastating. And finally, we come to the Crocodylinae, the mainline crocodiles and the ones that we all know and love, including the genus Crocodylus and all of its direct relatives. One of the first true crocodiles in Asia, Crocodylus paleoindicus, was once thought to be a direct ancestor to mugger crocodiles. This has somewhat been contested by other studies, but still remains a possibility due to distinct similarities between the two animals. Many of the early animals may have been even larger than modern crocodiles, with some estimates for animals like C. anthropophagus and C. thorbjarnarsoni reaching up to 25 feet over 7.5 meters long. There is also evidence that some of these crocodilians would have preyed upon humans, and they were equipped very similarly to modern crocs to do so. C. thorbjarnarsoni was particularly notable for being a crocodile with a relatively broad snout, not usually seen in crocs. These were likely ancestral to many of the African crocodile species that would begin to arise and could be found today across the world. Here they are split into two lineages, quote unquote, but still remain as one cohesive family. The lineages are the African and New World lineage and the Asian and Australian lineage. Both of these lines originated in Africa, but some left and evolved separately due to different pressures on their respective continents. It was thought that these groups diverged 12 to 13 million years ago, with the freshwater crocodile being one of the first to appear. Just to let you know, I'm going to refer to the first one as the ANW lineage and the second one as the AA lineage. Starting with the ANW, they can of course be further split into the African and American lines. These lines also contain two extinct species, Crocodylus falconensis and Crocodylus chachii. Both of these species contain extreme similarities to one another, including a bony protrusion along their skulls, sometimes known as a boss, like in the dinosaur Pachyrhinosaurus. While it certainly doesn't share the same function as the dinosaur's variation, these bosses are only found today in the Neotropical species of crocodiles in the Americas. Furthermore, while C. falconensis was found in Venezuela, South America, C. chachii was found in Tanzania, Kenya, and Libya in Africa. It is currently thought that the two are sister taxons and may possibly represent multiple crocodile lineage that would expand towards the Americas. The two living representatives of crocodiles in Africa are one well-known and one lesser-known animal. The lesser-known is the West African crocodile, and the more widely known is the Nile crocodile. Of course, the West African croc seems to often be mistaken for their more aggressive cousin, but they don't quite get as large. Despite this mistake, they are actually not closely related to any living crocodiles, with their closest known relatives being extinct species. West African crocs are an incredibly basal among the ANW lineage. They are also smaller than the Nile crocs, with large males reaching around 10 feet, just over 3 meters on average. Exceptional individuals have been reported up to 13 feet, around 4 meters, but this still makes them relatively small, but certainly not the smallest. They are of course still formidable predators. Their heads are fairly short, but like many crocodiles, it is also robust and powerful. Unfortunately, not much is known about the differences between this animal and the Nile crocodile due to the species only being more broadly recognized since 2011. We have, however, learned that this crocodile is sometimes worshipped. These crocodiles have adapted to the dry season incredibly well, enough so that some populations can be found in parts of the Sahara Desert. They will undergo aestivation, burrowing in the sand during the driest periods and remaining dormant until the rains return. This has led to the nickname the sand crocodile. crocodile. The Mauritanian people of the area revere these crocodiles. They believe that the crocs are essential to the water, and without them the water would not return after the dry season. Because of that, these animals are heavily protected in these areas. Allegedly, in Mauritania, the animal coexists peacefully with humans and they don't attack swimmers. But worship of these animals goes even further. In ancient Egypt, these animals were often worshipped due to the belief that they were connected to Sobek, one of their gods who bore the visage of a crocodile. Because they were more docile and easier to handle than the Nile crocodile, they are more commonly found throughout Egyptian archaeological sites. They were given places of honor and were embedded in the society, and it was even said that some were kept as pets. Allegedly, in Sobek's temple, they would have a crocodile living in the pool that was worshipped, adorned with jewels and gold, and fed lavish meals. These crocodiles, as well as others of honors, have been found mummified in their own sarcophagi, laid to rest just as a person would. Due to how recently they have been recognized as a species, their population numbers are still up in the air, and I couldn't find any good information on it. Though, with how revered and cared for these animals are and how widespread their range is, I am hopeful that these animals are safe for now. Now, their counterpart is another story entirely. One of the most famous crocodiles worldwide is Gustav, and he belongs to this species, the Nile crocodiles. This is a relatively old group, emerging around 11 million years ago and spreading across much of modern-day Africa. They are absolutely massive animals and the second largest living crocodilian. Average sizes differ by region, as some environments are much better than others. Based on estimates I've seen, it seems average size goes between 10 to 15 feet for large males, around 3 to 4.5 meters long. However, unlike many other crocodilians, exceptional specimens have been recorded over the years for the Nile croc. While Gustav is often speculated to be the largest Nile crocodile, and I personally believe he might be, we don't know for sure as he has never been captured and measured in any official capacity. The largest confirmed Nile crocodile was still incredibly massive, reaching nearly 6.5 meters, around 21 feet, and weighing 2,400 pounds, more than a ton. Other exceptional animals have been seen over the years, though larger individuals are less common as human expansion continues. Like all crocodiles, aside from gharials and the slender-snouted variation, these animals have an exceptionally powerful bite force, and when combined with their large size makes them one of the top predators in their ecosystem. No animal is safe at the water's edge because of these animals, and they are incredibly aggressive even by crocodile standards. This aggression has led to a sort of pecking order to reduce competition between themselves, since many individuals inhabit territory together. The largest males get to eat first, get first access to girls, and get the best basking spots. They are found in all sorts of habitats, even in brackish water. While biologically they are able to tolerate salt water, they seem to prefer to stay in freshwater habitats as much as possible. Because of their tolerance of habitats, they can be found in many places of Africa, and even in some parts of Madagascar. We haven't really mentioned it yet, so let's talk about basking in crocodiles real quick. It is known that basking is used as a way for these animals to regulate their body temperature. Laying in the sun allows them to raise their temp higher and allowing them better performance. However, on particularly hot days, they can also open their mouths to expel heat when basking, allowing themselves to reach a good temperature without burning up too much. Because of course, too much heat can kill crocodiles if they don't regulate their temperature enough. Like the West African crocodiles, in the drier parts of their territory, Nile crocodiles will also undergo aestivation. They create burrows, entering a state of semi-dormancy while they wait for the water to return. Of course, they are remarkably adaptable. Nile crocodiles are opportunistic predators and can go for many months without eating. Sometimes they will wait whole seasons in certain areas for their prey to return before hunting again. Females, like in most crocodilian species, won't eat while they're guarding their nest. However, when they're on the hunt, nothing is safe. Larger animals can take almost anything that comes into the water, save for giant mammals like hippos and elephants. Wildebeest, zebras, and various antelope all seem to be common prey. They've even been seen using their tails to unbalance animals, making it easier to grab them and drag them back into the water. They can also be cooperative to an extent. Smaller animals will take a variety of food and have even been seen driving fish to the shoreline to make easier pickings, working together to trap them. When hunting larger prey and sharing a meal, they will use each other as leverage to rip chunks from their prey, allowing the larger individuals to eat first while waiting their turn. Fighting is a common occurrence at these feeding sites, so cooperation is extremely limited. But one of the most shocking and frightening things about these animals is that despite despite being best adapted and unmatched in the water, they will occasionally hunt on land. Individuals have been noted to hide along game trails in thick brush, relying on wild and unpredictable ambush attacks. They will never stray too far from the water's edge, but far enough that one would not be expecting it. During leaner times, this will occasionally bring them into conflict with mammalian predators like lions and hyenas. Such conflicts rarely end in bloodshed, as a dominant party is usually quickly established. Bigger crocodiles have been noted to go after these mammal predators, and a large enough group have been known to hunt the crocodiles as well. The winner is usually determined by the setting, and it is rarely set in stone. Most of the time, these predators avoid each other for this exact reason. Nile crocodiles, unfortunately, have an incredibly complicated history. In the 1940s, hunting these animals for leather became incredibly common, and a market for their meat had already been established by locals, but the locals had been sustainably hunting these crocs for generations. However, from the 40s onwards, things began to look grim. Crocs were taken in massive numbers, and like the American alligator, they faced extinction by the 60s. Because of this, protections went up in several places all over Africa, but poaching and destruction of their habitat hindered their recovery in many places. Part of the reason for this is simply their proximity to humanity. They live in direct contact with humans throughout much of their range and will not shy away from hunting us as well. This has earned them a reputation as man-eaters and the animosity of the locals and some people worldwide. Because of the danger, many people don't want to stop hunting them and would rather they either go away or become extinct, and I don't blame people for that, because how would you feel if you'd lost someone to a croc yourself? That being said, I am never a proponent of wiping out a species simply because we fear it. Technology advances all the time, and it will get easier to find ways to coexist as time goes on. Wiping out the animals is not the solution, and that being said, many scientists have stated that with proper precautions, there was hardly ever any real danger from them in the first place. Regardless, this has caused difficulty in their recovery as the years have gone on in certain areas, especially in West and Central Africa. In these areas, pollution has also been a major cause of their decline as well, forcing them to find new territory or die. But certainly today, their greatest threat in these areas is poaching and unlawful hunting, as with much of Africa. However, in Eastern and Southern Africa, these animals have made an astonishing recovery thanks to regulations still in place today that reduce some of the killing. Because of this recovery as a whole, the species is not endangered today. Efforts are still underway, thankfully, to repatriate the species across their entire range. Nile crocodiles are one of the most fearsome modern representatives of crocs and are a brilliant and terrifying species. They are truly amazing, even if we fear them. That brings us to the American line of crocodiles that inhabit the Neotropics and parts of the Americas. These are all living animals, represented by the Cuban, Morelettes, Oronoco, and American crocodiles. The Cuban and Morelettes are closer related to each other, and the same is true for the American and Oronoco. Morelette's crocodile, also known as the Mexican crocodile, is a modestly sized species, as are most of the American species. Average large sizes for males place them at around 8 feet 10 inches, around 2.7 meters long. Today, exceptionally large males have been noted to reach 10 feet or 3 meters in length, though there are records in the past of even larger animals reaching between 13 to 15 feet or 4 to 4.5 meters. These are rather robust crocs at that size and have exceptionally powerful muscles in their legs, which is a trait they share with the Cuban crocodile. This allows these animals to have explosive bursts of energy, even on land. These animals, like most crocs, are generalists, feeding on a variety of smaller animals. Larger animals, of course, take larger prey, which may even include other crocodilians like Caiman or even other crocs. They have even been noted to take large prey like capybara or cattle as well. Though large prey like that is incredibly uncommon for these animals, as exceptionally large crocs are rare. Aside from these few rare giants, these crocs must face competition from other crocodilians as well as jaguars who will hunt them at their smaller size and even at their relatively large sizes. They can be found throughout Central America and have even been seen as far north as the Rio Grande. During the 40s and 50s, these animals were targeted by hunters and poachers for their skin, leading to drastic decreases in population. Like many other species, efforts began to save them following this, and they had a middle-of-the-road recovery. In the more northern extents of their range, like Mexico and Belize, they are thriving once more and are considered least concerned in these areas. However, they are much rarer in places they were formerly common, and work still needs to be done to bring these animals back to the fold. but their story is not so desperate as their closest relative, the Cuban crocodile. Naturally, Cuban crocodiles are of course native to Cuba. While not the largest of crocs, Cuban crocs have a reputation due to a few characteristics. They are mid-sized on terms of crocodiles, with the largest males reaching up to 11 feet 3.5 meters, though on average they reach around 9 feet 2.75 meters. Their most notable characteristic is their rather long legs. While they do live in and around water sources, this species is well adapted to terrestrial life. Its legs are not only longer, but its front pair lack the webbing between the toes that are commonly found in crocs, and have reduced webbing on their rear feet as well. While most crocs are capable of a high walk and some can even run or gallop, I know, terrifying, Cuban crocs take this to a whole new level. They can run at up to speeds of 22 miles per hour, faster than most people, though they seem to average at around 15 miles per hour. While they can keep this up longer than their cousins, they still can only do so for a relatively short period of time compared to mammals. I'm unsure if they hunt this way. Most studies I've seen seem to show that they mainly still hunt from the water, feeding on a variety of prey. That being said, it wouldn't surprise me if they use their running to quickly close the distance on unsuspecting prey, or to get themselves out of harm's way, dodging what they might consider a predator. It's us, by the way. We're their most common predator, but we'll get to that in a second. Another interesting thing about this animal is its brain. Most crocodiles we have found exhibit a higher level of intelligence than most would usually expect. They can be taught basic commands in captivity, including food cues, to make the staff safer in enclosures. However, the Cuban croc takes this even further. They have been observed displaying, well, play-like behavior. Some have been seen playing with flower petals, pushing them around in the water and carrying them on the tips of their nose. Others were noted for letting other crocs ride around on their backs through the water. In an experiment, they preferred colored cinder blocks to their standard ones and would take the colorful ones back to the water. Aside from playful behavior, they are also known to work cooperatively. Whether this behavior is exhibited in the wild is unknown, but workers at Gatorland observed that the crocs coordinated attacks against them whenever they entered the enclosure, working together to attack their keepers from different angles, reminiscent of the raptors from Jurassic Park. This behavior has been reported for this group in multiple instances. It is thought that this intelligence is what makes them aggressive and territorial. This species is actually one of the most aggressive croc species, perhaps only behind its two largest cousins, and certainly the most aggressive in the Americas. Due to their aggression and capability to walk on land, many people fear this animal and want them gone. And again, while I understand that, fear is not a good reason to allow an animal to fade into extinction. There are almost never good reasons for it, especially when we are the cause. Cuban crocs are one of the most endangered species of crocs alive today, with less than 4,000 thought to remain. They face numerous threats, but mainly from humans. In the past, these animals could be found in Cuba and the islands of the Caribbean, and likely along the coastal areas as well. Humans have basically wiped them out from nearly everywhere, extensively hunting them for their meat and skins. Because of this, they are no longer present in the Caribbean and are now restricted to just Cuba, and even there they face major threats. Outside of poaching, which still remains a significant threat to this day, they have lost a significant amount of territory to human industrialization. Another threat they face is competition. Spectacled caimans have encroached on their territory, and they reproduce much faster than Cuban crocodiles. Despite the crocodile's supremacy in physical confrontation, they are slowly being driven out by the caiman's resilience and their faster breeding. And on top of all that, they face the threat of genetic extinction. The American crocodile, which has a wider range, has hybridized with Cuban crocs on some occasions. This hurts the genetics of the actual species. If it's too widespread, this could cause their genetic extinction. This is the same problem Scottish wildcats currently face due to people being irresponsible cat owners and letting their cats outdoors, except this problem is not directly caused by humans, unlike with the cats. Breeding programs across Europe, the US, and South America are all currently underway to try and save this species, and I will hold out hope that they can manage to. We can do our part and make sure that these animals are safe in the wild as best we can. Our next two species are closer related to each other, just as the last two were. Here we have the Oronoco and American crocodile. Unlike with the others, the confusion for these two is actually completely understandable. They have a very similar body plan overall, as well as being the overall largest crocodilians in their environment, rivaled only by the black caiman, but few caiman can attain the sizes of these crocs. American crocodiles are by far the most widespread crocodile species in the Neotropics and surrounding areas, with populations present even as far north as the United States and Florida. But don't worry, these animals are not likely to move much farther north than Tampa Bay, as they are not as tolerant of the cold as alligators and can't survive very far north. In the past, American crocodiles actually used to be plentiful in Florida, but more on that later. These crocs tend to stick to salt or brackish water, mainly living in coastal areas, and are more rare inland. Aside from saltwater crocs themselves, American crocodiles are the most common in saltwater ecosystems, and they thrive there. While generally accepted as one of the largest crocodilians in its territory, precise sizes can be difficult to verify with this species due to the way crocodilians grow. Once they attain a certain age, depending on the resources available to them, they begin to bulk and put on weight rather than length, growing substantially in strength and power. The average for these guys ranges between 3 to 4 meters, about 10 to 13 feet. However, it seems that they can attain truly massive sizes. In the United States, the largest one found was a whopping 15 feet, around 4.5 meters long. There are larger, unverified reports from South America alleging a massive size of up to 23 feet or 7 meters long. However, as I said, there are no verified reports of this animal reaching that size, and therefore we cannot say for certain. A big issue is human hunting may have taken a lot of the larger genes out of the pool. Today, it seems generally accepted, however, that they can reach sizes of around 19.8 feet, about 6 meters, though this is an incredibly rare and unseen occurrence. When young, these animals prefer smaller prey like fish and birds as they have a narrow snout. However, unlike the fish specialists like gharials, they have a more generalized approach to feeding. As they get older and bulkier, their prey changes with them and allows them to take on much bigger animals like cattle. Despite their ability to take on larger prey, these crocodiles are relatively docile compared to even alligators. Thanks to niche partitioning, they don't usually come into conflict with alligators. They do, however, have conflict with the spectacled caimans. They will eat caimans, but the caimans reproduce much faster. In areas where the crocs have been heavily hunted, the caiman has moved in and made it difficult for the crocs to recover. Conversely, areas where the croc is dominant hold low numbers of caiman. Because of this, they are in conflict fairly often. Like so many others, these crocs were overhunted in the past. It wasn't until 1972 that laws were set in place that protected these animals and began to help them recover. But as of right now, those laws haven't completely gotten them out of the woods. They were nearly wiped out in Florida, so much so that many people believe that alligators were Florida's only native crocodilian species. It's only been a more recent thing that they've begun to return, a sign that they are recovering and that some areas are still habitable, which is a huge win. In places like Jamaica, where they had a decent population in recent years, they have been poached in high numbers with no real effort from the government to stop the killing. This has led to a drastic drop in their numbers. As I mentioned, in many places where they were driven to near extinction like Venezuela, the spectacled caiman or other similar animals have made it hard for them to recover. However, thankfully they are no longer considered endangered. Now they are considered vulnerable, so they're not completely out of the woods, but they're on the road to recovery. Finally, we reach the last of the Neotropic crocs, the Oronoco crocodile, named after a river basin that goes through Colombia and Venezuela. Oronoco crocs can be easily distinguished from American crocs once they are adults. The adult American croc has a much bulkier head than an adult Oronoco, which maintains a narrower snout overall. This is because while it does hunt other animals, its main prey is fish, but not just any fish. These animals tend to tackle the large predatory fish, like catfish, rather than the ones humans more commonly eat. In the past, locals justified the killings of crocs by claiming that they were driving the fish population too low, a point that was later shown to be wrong. This is the same as in the United States with predators like wolves, who are often blamed for the destruction of deer populations even though they are not the cause. Wolves naturally manage the deer population and are often blamed for poor hunting season. This has led wolves to face similar prejudice to the Oronoco crocodile, blamed for doing what it naturally does in its natural habitat. In both cases, the animals were in the right. That being said, the crocs will still take other prey as well, especially large males, as they still remain far bulkier than females or younger counterparts. While all the crocs in the Americas are large, it is widely accepted that none are as large on average as the Oronoco crocodile, though many others that I've already mentioned come close. As I mentioned prior, a big issue faced by a lot of these animal sizes has been human hunting. Humans wiped out many of the larger animals, whether for trophies, skin, meat, or similar. Because of that, a lot of those genes of the giant animals were removed from their respective pools. This can be seen worldwide in many different animals, who rarely achieve the monstrous sizes alleged in the past. The same is true for the Oronoco. Average sizes place these guys at around 16 feet, 4.8 meters in length. The largest Oronoco known from modern times was 16 feet 9 inches, about 5.1 meters. However, historical record shows us a much much larger animal. A specimen shot in 1800, over 200 years ago now, was reported to measure 22 feet 3 inches, around 6.8 meters in length. While this estimate is considered reliable, there has never been a specimen put forth to prove it, so some scientists don't consider it possible. Today, it is generally agreed that most Oronocos will not exceed 17 feet. Unfortunately, these animals are still under threats today. In the past, they were hunted to near extinction, closer than most other species. Their large size made them attractive targets, and they were extensively hunted for skin and meat. Like many others in the 70s, they were given protections, but they were already on the precipice of death. Their recovery has been slow and difficult because they face numerous issues. First, despite legal protections, they are still being poached, and nowadays hatchlings are being taken for the pet trade from the wild. This impacts their numbers even more. Like American crocodiles, they too face the issue with competition from spectacled caimans. Current estimates believe that there are only between 500 to 1,500 wild animals left. While there are conservation programs underway, many of them face other issues, further hindering the Oronoco's recovery. Many of these programs lack the proper resources to make a significant difference. I personally believe these conservation efforts should form a united front of some sort to bolster the chances of these animals. Now, that being said, I commend these efforts for taking place at all, despite how much difficulty they certainly have faced. Their biggest success has been in the Llanos region, which is part of both Colombia and Venezuela, and they are still releasing crocs there to this day. Hopefully, they can educate the local population across South America and help these amazing animals survive. And that brings us back around to the AA crocodiles, the ones from Asia and Australia. These are also split into two groups just like before. However, these groups don't have any fancy names, so just know that one group includes the New Guinea, freshwater, and Philippines crocs, and the others contain the saltwater, mugger, and Siamese crocs. One of the most unique among these are the freshies, or freshwater crocodiles. These little guys are unique and one of my favorite crocs, honestly. They are a relatively small crocodilian reaching average sizes of around 7.5 to 10 feet, about 2.3 to 3 meters in length, but they are significantly lighter than most other species at the same size, with males commonly weighing only around 150 pounds. Larger individuals can reach up to 13 feet or 4 meters have been recorded, but they are pretty rare. Size isn't what makes these guys effective survivors. Freshies are only found in Australia, and despite their name, they are also capable of living in saltwater as well. They live alongside the world's largest living crocodile, the saltwater crocodile, and still manage to thrive despite the other's aggression. Instead of large prey, these animals will target smaller creatures, especially crustaceans and fish. They will often simply wait for fish or similar to swim within range before striking. They have been known to take larger prey too, like wombats, but this is a rare occurrence due to their size. It is speculated that they may also try to avoid taking larger prey to avoid competition and attention from their larger relatives. They focus on their variety of small prey and will even eat snakes and similar animals. Their unique skull morphology doesn't change much, being rather slender overall. These animals are specialized generalists, meaning that they can take a variety of prey without sacrificing the adaptations that allow them to evade their larger relatives, such as a higher tolerance to arid and dry conditions. They are also a relatively docile species and not prone to the aggression of other crocs. In fact, there are incredibly few cases of this species even attacking a human, and no fatalities have ever occurred. They have bitten people on occasion, but they're never serious injuries. They're feisty, but certainly not aggressive. Unlike many, these animals are not really targeted by the locals, and there are likely a few reasons. One nowadays is that Australians seem to be more educated on reptiles than most of the rest of the world, partially because they live alongside them and partially because many folks from Australia are open and trying to teach folks. Another reason is simply they aren't aggressive. Many people hunt crocodiles because they fear them and often believe that they are doing the right thing. Freshies don't have the man-eating reputation and are therefore thought to be less dangerous. That being said, while they don't directly face threats from us, we have caused them some issues. Our introduction of the cane toad has been disastrous for freshwater crocs. They cannot ingest this animal and they will die if they eat one. While salties are able to eat the cane toad, the freshies will simply die, like I said. Cane toads are one of Australia's biggest problems. The next crocodile, the New Guinea crocodile, is a relatively small and poorly understood species overall. Recently, this animal was divided in two, as it was shown that two distinct populations live in New Guinea. One population lives in the north and one in the south. These two groups were divided where the highlands of New Guinea rose, eventually leading to them becoming two unique animals, with their differences mainly in the skull and genetics. There are also slight differences in their armor pattern as well. Large males can reach up to 11 feet, around 3.5 meters long, and that goes for both of these species. They are not known to get much larger than this, and it's rare for them to achieve even these sizes. The northern population, Crocodylus novaeguinea, is found exclusively in New Guinea, while the other species, Crocodylus halley, can also be found in parts of Indonesia. While they are certainly capable of being in salt water, they seem to avoid it like many other crocodilians, only entering salted or brackish water in certain occasions. They are mainly nocturnal and feed almost exclusively at night. They don't seem to be picky eaters and are known to eat almost anything worthy of their size, though they are not thought to be particularly aggressive. In the past, this species also faced prejudice as well and was indeed hunted, though never to the degree that other species were. The northern animal was heavily hunted and almost driven to extinction until protections were placed on both it and the southern species. This managed to save a majority of these animals, who were able to recover in relative peace. Today, there are thought to be thousands of these animals in the wild, with healthy populations across their known range. Good for them. The last in this group is the Philippine crocodile, which was thought to be a subspecies of the New Guinea crocodile until the late 80s. Because of that, we lacked a good amount of research for these animals, and not much was known about them exclusively until more solid research began in the 2000s. They are known by several names with the local people, like buaya and bukarat. They are relatively small crocodiles and tend to stick exclusively to fresh water, which has limited them somewhat, but more on that later. Adults rarely exceed 9 feet, around 2.8 meters, and even then it is uncommon for them to reach that size. The largest of these animals known was around 11 feet, 3.5 meters long. Those would be record sizes and are incredibly rare. Because of their smaller size, the Philippine croc has thicker armor, much like the dwarf crocs and caimans, as a better form of protection. These animals are actually extremely important to the freshwater systems of the Philippines. Their main source of prey is fish, and these animals seem to have a habit of targeting the less healthy and dying fish. This is not necessarily uncommon with predators, but usually not to the degree seen in Philippine crocodiles. Why they target the weaker fish so often is unknown, but it keeps the fish populations incredibly healthy by removing the diseases. Because they aren't picky eaters, they also balance the fish populations as well, making sure that no one species attains more dominance in the waterways. Because their population is so spread out over the various islands of the Philippines, many of these populations are currently isolated, which has unfortunately led to a lower genetic pool. Traditionally, they were thought to be much more widespread, and their populations were more connected through the Visayas archipelago. Visayas is the centralmost part of the country, and the populations there used to allow contact between the more isolated populations. But, like so many others, these animals faced dire threats that have caused their population to decline immensely. Today, the Philippine crocodile is the most threatened crocodile in the world. Historically, the people of the Philippines both feared and worshipped crocodiles, seen as representatives of the spirits. The local people, prior to European colonization, had a sort of peace with the animals. They found that as long as you didn't bother them, for the most part, they left you alone. Being killed by a croc was considered an honorable death, but many also believed that a crocodile would only kill a person as punishment for breaking oaths or taboos. Today, these views seem to be less commonly held, and only in certain places are the crocs still revered and accepted by the locals. In many other places across the country, crocs are viewed as vermin that threaten livestock and children, even though the Philippines croc is not particularly aggressive. In the Philippines, crocs are often compared to corrupt government officials, which is where the name buaya comes from. Because of this, locals often kill them. The species was not recognized until the late 80s, and by then they were already in major danger. In 92, there was thought to be less than 1,000 of these crocodiles left in the wild, and as of today, there are believed to be less than 100 adults. The locals view them as man-eaters, a case of mistaken identity with the saltwater crocodile, which also shares their territory. Today, these local killings are the biggest threat to these animals. However, in the past, a big reason for their rapid decline was the loss of habitat. Many regions in the Philippines, including Visayas, was turned into farmland or human settlements, driving the crocs out. Thankfully, as of 2001, killing a crocodile is now punishable by law, which has helped in minor areas. Many conservation efforts are underway to try and save these animals, but as of now, their fate looks grim. Hopefully, we can help people all across the world to understand these animals better and want to protect them, and hopefully they can make a comeback like a couple of their relatives. And now we come to the last of the crocs, the final trio, Let's start with the least known of these three, the Siamese crocodile. This is not a well-known species for most people. This largely is because not a ton of research has been conducted on these animals in the wild. Much of their lifestyle, habits, and general activities are an overall mystery to us. This is because not only have we not done many studies, but this animal is reclusive and somewhat shy. They happen to live in denser, hard-to-reach parts of the jungle, making it incredibly difficult to get in and study them properly. They aren't aggressive towards humans, however, and the only recorded attacks seem to have been in self-defense or defense of their nest. These animals are known to mainly inhabit freshwater systems in southern Asia. They can be found in Indonesia and Malaysia, but can also be found on the mainland in countries like Cambodia. While not much is known about them, they are a mid-sized croc from what we can tell, and males typically grow to a maximum of around 10 feet or 3 meters long, but there have been exceptional specimens. These ones reach up to around 13 feet or 4 meters. Like many of their relatives, they mainly seem to prey on fish at all sizes, but they've also been seen eating snakes and amphibians. Today, this species is also threatened and is still in major danger. Only around 600 of these animals are thought to live in the wild, and they are completely gone from a majority of their former range across southern Asia, part of why it's so difficult to study them. The main reason for this, of course, is humans taking the land for themselves and driving these animals out. The farming industry has heavily impacted them by not only taking their territory, but also by damaging the ecosystem further with toxic fertilizers and pesticides. The Vietnam War was also a factor in their decline, as the war ravaged a large portion of these animals' natural territory with explosives. In modern times, dams have begun damaging the remaining populations as well, and the biggest threat to these animals is actually farming. You see, there is a huge market in these countries for crocodile skins, meats, and products. Because of that, in the 40s, they were captured to an extreme degree, kickstarting a crocodile farming industry. Unfortunately, this market is still thriving today, which has led to people capturing wild crocodiles and selling them to these farms, despite legal protections now in place. There are an insane amount of farms for this species, and it is thought that there are 700,000 crocodiles alive on farms today. They're being sold for skin and meat rather than being used for recovering the wild populations. But hope is not entirely lost. Many efforts are underway to save these wild populations. Cambodia in particular is leading the charge in this, with the government working with local people to protect not only the remaining animals, but their habitat as well. Others are following suit, as maintaining a healthy habitat will help these animals recover naturally. Several breeding programs outside of those farms have begun as well, trying to slowly bolster the total number in the wild. Currently, Cambodia and Laos hold the largest known populations of Siamese crocodiles, and so much of the world's focus is on those two regions, of course, but others shouldn't be counted out. In Vietnam and Thailand, the species is considered extinct in the wild. However, in recent years, Vietnam managed to establish a small breeding population and plans to expand on that. Thailand also now has a significant amount of protected areas and has their own crocodile program. Their goal is to reintroduce these animals into the protected areas and hopefully bring back Thailand's crocs, similar to Vietnam's plan. While these animals are certainly still under major threat, it warms my heart to know that many people are attempting to save these amazing creatures. Now we're at one of my other favorite crocs, one of the more infamous animals, the mugger crocodile. Alongside Nile and saltwater crocodiles, this is the image in my head when I think of the quintessential crocodile. This species seems to have first appeared around 4 to 8 million years ago and quickly spread. Today, they can be found all across the Indian subcontinent, as far east as Bangladesh and as far west as Iran, as well as throughout a majority of India. Males of this species are mid-sized to large animals. Averages place them around 11.5 feet, about 3.5 meters long, but the largest animals far exceed this. The record for a mugger crocodile was 18.5 feet, around 5.6 meters long, and weighed in over 1,000 pounds. That being said, those sizes are of course incredibly rare, and most mugger crocs never attain nearly that size. It has a powerful set of jaws, the broadest of all living crocodiles. Muggers prefer shallow water compared to other crocodilians, and they only tend to enjoy fresh water. Thankfully, there are many freshwater systems across its territory. Muggers are rather voracious hunters, and they are not picky whatsoever. While adults do seem to favor fish more often, they will take whatever they can get when the opportunity arises. Aside from the usual prey, muggers will also hunt monkeys, otters, and even the local pythons. Their largest prey are usually chital or axis deer, but the larger animals are occasionally known to take on animals as big as water buffalo. This species is also somewhat intelligent. Like I mentioned previously, they are one of the only crocodilians known to use tools to any capacity. During birds' nesting seasons, crocodiles will find larger twigs and rest them on their head, just like alligators. They will wait just below the twigs under the water for birds to fly down and take them. This method of luring is actually impressively effective where they're from and shows real use of tools, as the crocs will consistently do this. Their intelligence extends further, as they have also been observed stashing their food, much like crows or ravens. Other crocs, like the Nile crocodile, also stash food as a way to make it softer and easier for them to eat, as they are not capable of chewing properly. Interestingly, like other crocs, they can also dig burrows in times of intense weather. This allows them to both survive the harsh heat and cold, as their burrows can maintain a consistent temperature. Muggers don't often have to compete for resources with other predators. They share territory with gavials, and while they may occasionally compete for fish, niche partitioning keeps competition between them to a relative minimum and allows them to coexist somewhat peacefully. The only real threats are big cats. Muggers share territory with two different big cats in two different areas. Its most common foe are tigers, specifically Bengal tigers. Tigers will occasionally steal kills from the crocs, and in desperate times they have even been seen hunting the smaller ones. These crocs also have to face some minor competition from lions. Most people aren't aware, but India has a small population of lions, the Asiatic or Persian lion as they are known. These lions have been known to do the same as tigers, fighting over food with larger crocs and hunting the smaller ones. However, these are still rare occurrences either way. Mugger crocodiles have been subject to tales and myths throughout the years. They are worshipped by several cultures, and sometimes differently. Some consider them a symbol of strength of the goddess of the Ganges, Ganga. Some believe them to represent a crocodile god known as Mogra Dev, whom they pray to for children and a blessed harvest. Others believe that they represent the strength of the river itself and its ability to both give and take away, destruction and creation. Because of their revered status, muggers were often placed in tanks in and around holy temples and sites for both Islamic and Hinduistic cultures. Much like Egypt, here they were treated like royalty and prayed to by the locals. Overall, muggers haven't faced as much threat from humans as other species, but almost suffered unintended consequences because of us anyways. In Pakistan, the waterways were drained in certain areas by the arrival of dams. This, coupled with a massive drought that overtook the surrounding regions, drove these animals to their breaking point. It wasn't until hurricanes and other storms in the late 2000s reflooded these areas, which once again made them habitable for the mugger crocodiles. They have also faced other threats in the past, but few as severe as the dams. These threats prompted the governments of local countries to protect the crocs starting in 1972. This has allowed them to make a recovery, but they are still facing some issues. They are often poached for parts, like alleged aphrodisiacs. Fishermen will sometimes kill them, as they are seen as competition. Farmers will do the same if they see them as a threat to their livestock. However, this is worth noting that they are not usually local people who do this. In Iran and India, where locals still respect these animals, even in these conflicts, the crocodiles are never harmed. Rather, the local governments compensate the farmers for their lost cattle or goats, ensuring no retaliation to the crocodiles. I am unsure if this species has any breeding programs going on, but its populations have been slowly recovering naturally, and today there is thought to be over 9,000 individuals in the wild. Hopefully, with more focus and direction, this minor success can turn into something far more grand, and these animals can make a solid comeback. Finally, last but certainly not least, we come to the crocodile, what everyone imagines when they hear that word, the saltwater crocodile. These are the largest living reptiles on our planet. They are absolutely massive animals and have a wider range than most others. They can be found all across salt and freshwater environments from Australia to India and many places in between. Historically, it was thought that salties had a much wider range, possibly encompassing much of Asia's coastlines and brackish water systems. Today, however, they are most common in Australia and the Pacific Island nations and will still appear along coastal regions in places like India. This species is highly tolerant to saltwater, of course, and is far more commonly seen in the oceans than other species. Many salties have been known to travel extremely long distances. One particular individual was noted for having traveled 370 miles or 590 kilometers in the span of 25 days. They use the ocean currents to help themselves conserve energy, allowing it to carry them along. The oldest records of these animals date back to the Pliocene, around 5 million years ago for this species. Even since then, these animals have been huge, at least by today's standards. Historically, while a few other crocs can attain sizes of around 20 feet or 6 meters, none can do so as frequently as the saltwater crocodile. Depending on their location seems to change the average size of these animals, with richer environments creating larger animals. Using all the averages, they typically range from 12 feet 3.6 meters to 18 feet about 5.5 meters. Remember, with crocs, the larger they get, they tend to bulk up after a certain point rather than grow lengthwise. Some places produce extremely small crocodiles, with some young adult males having been measured at only 7 feet or 2.1 meters long. Others, however, produce absolute beasts. As I said, many salties have been known to hit enormous sizes. One of the largest known crocs in captivity today, Cassius, is an 18-footer and weighs nearly 2,900 pounds, around 1,300 kilograms. Others in captivity have been even bigger. Lolong, one of the largest crocs ever held in captivity, was 20 feet 3 inches in length, around 6.2 meters. He was only the longest, however, and actually weighed less than Cassius does at 2,360 pounds, around 1,075 kilograms. It is worth noting that many other crocs have come around this size, but another thing too is that Cassius was last measured in 2011, so it is definitely possible that he's gotten significantly bigger over the last dozen or so years. I don't believe any specimen has ever been captured or measured at lengths or weights greater than these animals in any confirmed sense, but skulls tell another story. Crocodiles have been killed a lot historically, as I'm sure you can tell at this point, and these guys are no exception. Some of the skulls that we have of these animals show animals that could reach at least 23 feet or 7 meters in length, and with the bulk the skull shows, it was estimated that an animal that size would be around 3,300 pounds, about 1,500 kilograms. There have been numerous reports about even larger sizes, but many of these have been unconfirmed or disproven outright. There are claims about, quote, Lolong's brother, unquote, and Chris the crocodile, but both of these animals are unconfirmed, and I believe Chris might even be downright disproven. This particular photo that so many people seem to associate with Chris the crocodile was taken back in the 1910s in an entirely different part of Australia. Chris was allegedly shot in 1957, but no remains of the animal or proof of that size was ever shown. Personally, I believe that it is a myth, though I don't doubt the giants have existed before. Chris was reported to be 28 feet or 8.5 meters long, significantly larger than what you would expect from a saltwater crocodile today. Multiple others have been proposed, but nothing has ever been confirmed, so as of now, 23 feet is the largest, but they can weigh a lot. While saltwater crocodiles still have strong armor, their armor is reduced in some places, allowing them more fluid movements. They are strongly built and wide animals, especially as they age. They have the strongest jaws of any living animal in terms of raw bite power. A 15-foot, 4.6 meter croc had a bite force of 3,700 pounds per square inch, and that was the highest ever recorded. Using this, it was estimated that the larger individuals could produce forces of up to 7,700 pounds per square inch. Absolutely devastating. All crocs may have a relatively strong bite force, though none living has one so strong as the salty. The way their jaws are structured, they have immense closing power, but not a lot of opening power. The same is true for a lot of crocodilians, which is why they can be restrained using duct tape or even just your bare hands if you're quick enough. Salties are some of the most active crocodilians, and despite that, they still spend a lot of their time doing nothing. They do this mainly to conserve energy and hunt when necessary or when an opportunity arises. They can go without eating for literal months. They are not picky at all, and they'll eat absolutely anything. Their prey just varies on opportunity, though they are able to track the migratory routes of some species and wait for them. They can take on most of the larger animals in their region, even water buffalo, with relative ease once they reach truly enormous sizes. Even at smaller sizes, they are capable of taking on surprisingly large prey like kangaroos, boar, and sea turtles. Like other crocodilians, they are surprisingly agile, with even giant giant crocodiles able to launch themselves out of the water with just their tail if the water is deep enough, allowing them to go straight upwards in pursuit of prey. They are unmatched by almost any predator in their range, with only animals like orcas and large sharks posing any real threat. In the case of the shark, it would likely not want to attack a crocodile. Crocodiles are known to sometimes kill and even eat large sharks, most commonly the bull shark, as they venture into the same brackish water territory. Salties are also one of the only native Australian animals that are able to eat the invasive cane toad, unlike their freshwater relatives. However, they can only do so in small amounts at a time, which unfortunately does not help much in the problem overall. Large crocs do not ignore small prey either, and will even target non-consequential meals if the opportunity is good enough. For these guys, anything is on the menu. Salties and humans have an extensive history together. Like other crocs, many have revered and feared these animals over the course of their history. The locals of Timor and the Papuans of New Guinea consider the animals sacred. In Australia, the indigenous Australian people believed that the saltwater crocodile was banished to saltwater because it was full of bad spirits and had grown too powerful and large. In contrast, it was believed by these same people that the freshwater crocodiles were holy and pure, which is why they were allowed to stay in the fresh water. Of course, saltwater crocodiles are still able to enter freshwater. They just have a higher tendency to spread out due to how territorial and aggressive they are. Males can occupy large stretches of water, and while they will tolerate others to some degree, smaller males must constantly be on their toes. While human attacks have certainly occurred over history, they are surprisingly low considering how much people fear this animal. This fear is likely due to efforts made by the local governments to warn people about the dangers of these animals and keeping human contact to a minimum to avoid potentially lethal confrontations for either party. There have been claims that saltwater crocodiles kill thousands of people yearly, but this has been proven false. From 1971 to 2013, over the course of 42 years, there were only 106 attacks recorded in Australia. Usually only 1 or 2 fatal attacks happen a year. If a croc does grab you, there is of course little chance of escape. Many crocs will do mock attacks or may lunge at people when they encroach on territory. While this has occasionally ended in injuries, many people walk away from such encounters because the crocs aren't after food, they just want you out of their home. In the past, this danger was turned into hatred, and many people shot and killed salties. Their skin, meat, eggs, and anything related were sold and taken in enormous quantities. So much killing occurred that in 1971 it was thought that they were almost completely extinct in Australia, with over 90% of the known Australian population having been wiped out. Since then, of course, protections have been in place, but in many places they've not recovered. They are still often poached and murdered, resulting in extremely low numbers and a difficult recovery in many areas outside of Australia and even some areas within. Unfortunately, they continually lose territory to human developments, which groups like Wildlife Warriors, a group started by Steve Irwin and his family, are constantly combating. They, and others like them, are the main support of the crocs and have helped them at least somewhat recover. Thanks to efforts of groups like theirs, today these animals are not threatened with extinction, though they are missing from many of their ancestral homes. Hopefully in the future they can go back in peace and restore their rightful place as the king of the waterways. Crocodiles and pseudosuchians as a whole have had an insanely extensive history. There are so many gaps in our knowledge, but we can still put many of the pieces together about these amazing and ancient creatures. Though many of them are extinct, there are still amazing creatures today that we can study and learn, and so many fossils left behind that we can do the same. From land-based crocs to seafaring crocs to the crocs that we know and love today, this has been the Dynasty of Crocodiles. Folks, thank you all so very much for watching, and an extra big thank you to all my collaborators from both the previous and this video. This video and its predecessor took me quite some time to get together, so my apologies that it took me so very long. I am incredibly excited for future projects, and I thank you all for being very patient with me. As always, thank you all for watching once again. Remember to be good people, drink plenty of water, and I'll see you guys in the next one.